everyone, good morning. My name is Erin O'Connell. I work here at Indian Rock Nature Preserve, part of Environmental Learning Centers of Connecticut. Thank you for joining us this morning. Today we're going to talk about the eastern screech owl. Many of you have probably heard an eastern screech owl, maybe in the early evening hours or sometimes overnight or even early morning before the sun comes up. And their call is not that quintessential hooting sound that you would think an owl would make. It's not making a hoo, hoo, hoo sound. It makes a very eerie kind of horse-like whinny call. So if you can see here, we have Piper. And Piper is one of our permanent resident eastern screech owls. I'm going to play a call from my phone. And you guys can do this at home too. This is from a great website, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, all about birds. And this is the hauntingly beautiful call of the eastern screech owl. Because Piper will not do it for us now. Or neither will my phone. All right, so I'm gonna have to do it myself. So the eastern screech owl call, it sounds kind of like a horse's whinny, kind of like a woo, woo, woo. Are you responding to that, Piper? So not that quintessential hooting sound that you would think would come from an owl. So these guys are pretty small in size. This is as big as an eastern screech owl will get. So she weighs approximately, probably about 7 ounces. Maybe 6.5 ounces, not very heavy. And you know, sitting on my hand like this, it looks like she might be a little bit more bulky, maybe weigh a little bit more than that. But if you think about the adaptations that birds have to make them light in order for them to fly, they have those adaptations that make them light. One of them being hollow bones. I have an example here of a hollow bone. This is from one of the long bones of a chicken. Probably its femur. And you can see the inside there. You can see right through like a straw to the other side. So many of the bones of birds are hollow, and that enables them to be lighter so they can fly. They also have some other adaptations that make them light so they can fly. And one of them being their beak. Now, I have a couple examples of some beaks here. One from an ostrich, very lightweight skull. Very interesting looking beak. And this one here is a replica skull from a barred owl. Now if you look at the beak of a bird, you can see that it does not have teeth. So not having teeth enables their jaw to be lighter, okay? Taking off that extra weight that a heavy jawbone filled with teeth would have. So all birds have beaks. And you can tell a lot about how a bird lives, what it eats, just by looking at the shape of its beak. If you look at that ostrich skull, it's kind of a flattened beak. This is a beak for grazing. If you think about where ostriches come from, where they live, they're going to be eating all sorts of grasses and seeds. And looking back at that barred owl, that is a sharp hooked beak, kind of like a knife. They'll bite off little bite-sized pieces of meat, okay? They are a predator, a carnivore. They're eating meat and using that sharp hooked beak like a knife to bite off little bite-sized pieces. If you look at our screech owl beak, it looks a little bit hidden amongst all those feathers, okay? But it is a sharp hooked beak. And screech owls being small, they still, if they capture a big mouse or a bigger prey item, they will take little bite-sized pieces off, make them into smaller pieces, easier to swallow, but they also enjoy swallowing their prey whole. So little field mice, perfect size to go right down whole. Now, has anybody ever heard of an owl pellet before? Anybody? Has anybody ever found an owl pellet before outside, maybe at the base of a tree? Or maybe you dissected one at your school or a nature center you visited. Owl pellets are pretty cool because you can tell a lot about what an owl has eaten in its particular environment or habitat just by dissecting or looking at those pellets. So these are 3 examples of pellets from different types of owls, but just because they are different colors, you see one is more dark, one is kind of whitish, and one is kind of off-white. That is not because of the particular type of owl that spit them up, it is because it is the coloration of the prey item that that owl ate, okay? So a bigger owl is going to give a bigger owl pellet. That is from a barred owl. This little one over here, that is actually from an eastern screech owl. So smaller prey items are eaten by that smaller bird. So if you dissect those, you can pick all those little bones out of there, separate it from the hair, and you can actually put the skeleton back together of what that animal ate, what that owl ate, and see what they are eating in a particular habitat or area. And scientists can use that to determine a lot of stuff about how those particular species live. Now, why do they cough up an owl pellet? Well, it's actually pretty neat because these guys cannot digest the hair and the bones. So some birds can do that, but not owls. They actually have to spit up or regurgitate, just like a cat kind of coughs up a hairball. These guys will cough up a pellet, and they'll produce 1 or 2 a day. And you can find them, like I said, at the base of trees where the owl might like to roost. If you find them, you have owls in your area. So if you look at this little eastern screech owl, you can see she is missing something. She only has one eye. I'm sure you guys noticed that right away. Now, this bird and all of the birds that live at Environmental Learning Centers of Connecticut, they're usually on display at the Barnes Nature Center. All of these birds are injured in some way that prevents them from surviving in the wild. Piper here was actually hit by a car. And you can imagine a 1-ton car or truck going 30 miles an hour or faster down the road, colliding with something that only weighs about 1/4 of a pound, hollow bones, very brittle. It usually doesn't end well. Piper, luckily, was found by someone in time and taken to a wildlife rehabilitation center where she was nursed back to health. Unfortunately, her injuries were so severe that she is unable to survive in the wild because she is missing one of her eyes. She has a limited capacity for successful hunting. If that was her only issue, maybe in certain circumstances or certain areas, an eastern screech owl will be able to be released back in the wild with one eye. But if you look over here at her wing, this wing does not sit symmetrically in line with the other. That wing was broken at the humerus and shoulder area and did not heal well. It was a very bad break. So unfortunately, even though the bones did heal, this bird cannot fly. She can get up from one perch to another if they're really, really close together to get up to an optimal perching area in her enclosure, but she cannot sustain flight. So that is why Piper lives with us. So if you look at this owl's head, you can see these little tufts. One here, I know Piper, and one here. How many people think those are ears? A lot of people think those things are ears, but in fact, they are just feathers. Little feather tufts on top of her head. Not all owl species have that. The great horned owl is another owl in our area that does have feather tufts. Okay, the barred owl is an owl in our area that does not have feather tufts. But these feather tufts, they actually aid in communication between individual screech owls because they can move them up and down. Sometimes they can lay flat on their head, boop, boop, like that. And then other times they can pick them or prick them straight up. Piper, you're staring me down. There we go. So those feather tufts or ear tufts, they also aid in camouflage. So if you look at the pattern of the feathers of this bird, you can see a lot of kind of molted coloration, some grays and blacks, some whites and some tans. These birds are perfectly camouflaged to sit closely on the trunks or near the trunks of gray-barked trees. Believe it or not, though, eastern screech owls come in 2 different color phases or color morphs. The gray phase, which Piper belongs to, and also the red phase. And scientists think that that coloration, that different coloration in the same species developed because, well, genetically, but based on habitat. So you will find more gray-phased eastern screech owls in our area because we have more of the gray-barked trees. However, if you have an area which has a lot of, say, red pines, they have more reddish bark, you'll find more of the red-phased eastern screech owls. And with that, I'm going to show you a red-phased screech owl. So say goodbye to Piper. All right.
So while Erin is getting our next Screech Owl, I would just like to promote our next Facebook Live video, which is going to be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. we're going to be talking about snakes. So we can get a sneak peek here. This tank back here, we have the Western hognose snake, which we're going to be meeting tomorrow. We are also going to be meeting a corn snake and learning all about them and their natural history.
All right, everyone, so here, you see I've switched gloved hands. Normally, when we are handling birds of prey, for consistency's sake and training, we usually use the left hand to glove and train our birds. But with Piper, her injury was such that you guys would have been looking at her bad side the entire time. So I had switched over to a right-handed glove. But since Kira here, our eastern screech owl that is a red phase, has both of her eyes. She's very symmetrical. Her wings look perfectly fine. She has all of her toes. She looks like a perfect specimen of a screech owl. Remember that I said the only reason that we have these birds in captivity is because they cannot survive in the wild for some reason. Piper had a physical injury. But Kira actually has something more mental going on, which sounds kind of bad. But what happened is when this bird was a very young chick, for some reason, was it either expelled or fell out or its nest was damaged when it was very, very small. And someone found this bird on the ground, a cute, tiny little fluff ball that was really adorable. They took it home, put it in a bird cage, and kept her as a pet. What do you think happens when you have a young bird or any young animal very susceptible to picking up all sorts of information going on around them? They become what's called imprinted. This bird is imprinted on humans. So because she grew up all around humans and not around other owls, she really didn't learn how to be an owl. She really thinks she's more like a human. So she can fly perfectly well. She can see perfectly well. Her talons work really well. But she's actually never hunted for herself. So if we were to set her free on Indian Rock Nature Preserve, a beautiful place where I know I've heard screech owls before, this bird would not know what to do. She's never hunted. She's never killed anything. She's never done anything that a wild screech owl would do. So that's why she lives in captivity and with us, and now acts as an ambassador of her species. So you guys get to see her up close. So you can see she does have those feather tufts, and she's got them perked right up for you. And if you look really, really close, around her eyes, do you guys see those circles? The darker feathers kind of around her eyes? Those are called facial discs. Barred owls have them. Great gray owls have them. Great horned owls have them. The eastern screech owl has them. All these owl species have a facial disc. And you can see that facial disc ends right about there, where that dark line is. If I was to peel back those feathers that are a little less dense than the feathers around them, you would see her ear. And her ear is actually just a hole in her head. It's not a flappy appendage that sticks out of your head like your dog or your cat or even your ear. You can grab your ear. She can't grab her ear. I can't grab her ear because it's just a hole in her head. But her ears are very, very specially adapted and perfectly attuned to the way that she hunts and how she finds food. Her hearing is so acute, so good, that she doesn't even have to see a prey item in order to catch her prey. She could be sitting up in a tree branch 6 to 10 feet above the ground. There could be snow on the ground and a vole or a mouse making noise underneath the snow. She could just turn her head and triangulate where that sound is coming from and pounce very accurately onto that mouse. Everybody know when these guys are active? Can you see them during the day? Sometimes you can. Sometimes, but it's very, very difficult. These guys are active at nighttime, so that's a nocturnal animal. You can sometimes, like I said before in the beginning, you can hear them at dusk or at dawn. Most of the time they're going to be active at nighttime, so that is a nocturnal hunter. And because she's active at night, if you look at her eyes, very, very big eyes. Those eyes are so big, if you can imagine having eyes like an owl and taking 2 oranges and sticking them in your head, that's how big your eyes would be if you had eyes like an owl. You guys want to see me do something silly? Now, I can open up these glasses with one hand. Let's see. So if I had eyes like an owl, they would take up most of my head. There's a lot of space taken up by those big eyes. But if you look at, it makes a little bit more sense, if you look at the skull, again, of that barred owl, look at how big those eyes are, how big those eye sockets are in the skull of a great horned owl. And if you notice, there are bones inside the eye socket. Those bones actually keep the eye in place in the skull. Owls' eyes are not globes. They're not round like ours are. They're actually shaped more like an hourglass. And they're so big that those bones hold them in place, but they can't move them in their eye sockets. So how many of you think that this owl can move their head 360 degrees all the way around? In cartoons, it often seems like they can because they go around and around and around. But in reality, they can turn their head about 3/4 of the way around, so about 270 degrees. And they have to turn their head because they cannot move their eyes like we can. There are no muscles attached to their eyes like ours. So they have to turn their head in order to see what's going on around them. Are there any questions out there about the screech owls? How they live? What they eat? No. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed meeting our eastern screech owls, Kira and Piper. This is Kira. Piper was the gray phase. Kira is the red phase. Like I said, they usually live at the Harry C. Barnes Memorial Nature Center on display. They are currently here at Indian Rock Nature Preserve, where we have staff that can take care of them every day, along with all of our other animals that are here. All right, everybody, if you have any questions, feel free to put them down and we'll answer them as soon as we can. Stay tuned for tomorrow's show. Tomorrow's show, we're talking about snakes. Have a great day.